The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering skyline of Manhattan, casting long shadows across Fifth Avenue, where life pulsed with the chaotic rhythm that only a city like New York could conduct. Taxi horns blaring impatiently, business people marching with tunnel vision toward their destinations, street vendors calling out their last pitches of the day, and tourists spinning in circles, overwhelmed by it all. Amid this noisy urban orchestra moved Claire Bennett, 8 months pregnant, weary but determined, stepping carefully onto the sidewalk after finishing her final obstetric appointment, her husband stuck in traffic and her phone low on battery, her eyes flicking up at the cloudless sky and offering a silent prayer of gratitude that everything seemed on track with the baby, at least until a violent, unexpected pain surged through her abdomen like a lightning bolt, doubling her over with a gasp that caught mid-breath, her hand flying to her belly as the edges of her vision blurred and her knees threatened to give way beneath her. She stumbled, managing to brace herself against a lamppost as another wave crashed through her, her heart thundering in panic as people streamed past her like water around a rock, glancing her way but offering nothing more than confusion or discomfort. Some briefly slowing, others tapping at their phones, capturing snippets of video as though her agony was a spectacle, rather than a plea for help. She tried to call out, her voice ragged and thin, but the words were swallowed by the city's relentless noise, and as a third contraction hit, sharper, closer, more brutal than the last, Claire crumpled onto the unforgiving concrete, gasping as her vision wavered and hot tears sprang to her eyes, not just from the pain, but from the terror blooming inside her. This wasn't supposed to happen yet, not here, not like this, not alone on a street filled with people who seemed to care more about not missing their meetings or finishing their phone calls than helping a woman in labor. Cars kept zooming past, a few drivers honking, none stopping, and the disjointed voices of strangers echoed in the background. Should we call 911? Is she okay? I think she's having a baby, man. But no one came close, no one offered a hand until out of the alley across the street, barely visible in the corner of her tear-blurred vision, a small figure emerged, moving not with a shuffle of curiosity or confusion, but with a strange, calm certainty, as though this moment was one he'd already seen in his mind. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, his frame gaunt beneath a tattered hoodie that hung too loosely on his shoulders, the sleeves frayed, the fabric stained, his pants rolled up at the ankles, and his bare feet toughened by the streets. His face streaked with dirt, but framed by dark, intense eyes that held none of the panic surrounding them, eyes that pierced through the chaos and landed firmly on Claire as he moved forward with the purposeful energy of someone who had faced emergencies before. He dropped to his knees beside her as she whimpered, flinching at a new contraction that left her clutching at the sidewalk, and he said, in a voice too calm for a child, "Mom, I can help you give birth." And the moment those words touched her ears, Claire's head turned slowly, almost unwillingly, her mind recoiling from the absurdity of the statement, even as her body screamed for relief and assistance. She looked at him through sweat-streaked lashes and tried to speak, but her throat was dry and raw, and what she managed to say came out in a weak croak. "You... what?" The boy didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't seem embarrassed or foolish for having spoken. What to anyone else would have been madness, and instead he calmly reached into the small satchel slung across his back and pulled out a bottle of water, pressing it into her hand, whispering, "Drink, you need to stay hydrated." And with a trembling hand she took a sip. Her eyes locked on his as another contraction hit, sharper this time, and the fear surged again, but when she looked into the boy's eyes, there was something ancient there. Something practiced and steady and utterly incongruous with the fragile, filthy frame that carried it. She couldn't speak again, only nod, and the boy turned to the gawking crowd and yelled, "We need blankets, clean towels, anything." But the onlookers just stared, phones raised, mouths agape, until one woman finally peeled off her scarf and tossed it toward him with a muttered, "This is all I've got," before fleeing the scene as if afraid of being entangled in a responsibility too big for her city-chiseled apathy. Claire writhed as another wave of pain curled her spine, and she let out a low moan, and the boy, Luca as she would later come to know him, placed one hand gently on her shoulder and another on her stomach, not intrusively but in a way that suggested he knew what to feel for, what to check, and after a moment he whispered, It's happening fast, the baby's coming soon, but I can help. I know what to do. And though every muscle in Claire's body screamed in protest and disbelief, some instinct deep within her trusted him, leaned into him, let go of the fear just long enough to nod again. Because in that moment, this boy was the only soul who wasn't treating her like an inconvenience or a freak show. He was treating her like a patient, like a human being in crisis who needed help, and he was the only one willing to step into the fire with her. He reached behind him, pulling out a few surprisingly clean cloths and a worn folded plastic sheet, which he laid beneath her as best as he could with her shifting body, shielding her from the grime of the concrete, and then began muttering instructions softly. Breathe, slow it down, and squeeze my hand when it hurts. Good, that's it. And the tension in Claire's body began to change, not lessening but reshaping, her terror converting to a focused kind of alertness under his guidance. Traffic still hummed nearby, the crowd still buzzed in fragmented whispers, but now some of the voices began to sound a little different. Who is that kid? Is he really helping her? Should we stop filming? And still no one stepped forward, the cameras rolling as though documenting a social experiment rather than a human birth. But Luca ignored them all, brushing sweat from Claire's brow with the scarf, lifting her head slightly, supporting her body as she shifted positions to ease the mounting pressure in her hips. And still he kept whispering in that calm, strange tone. One moment switching to a different language, Arabic, she thought vaguely, before switching back, his accent clean but layered with places she couldn't name, and Claire finally gasped, "Who are you?" But he only shook his head slightly and said, "Later. When the baby's here, I'll tell you everything. Tell you. Right now we focus." And though it felt like the pain was splitting her in two, she nodded, clinging to his voice like a lifeline as another contraction surged, and he timed them, measured them, coached her like a seasoned doula or street medic, and all the while the city continued around them, oblivious and watching, while in a forgotten pocket between two towering buildings, a homeless boy and a pregnant woman prepared to bring a new life into the world. Claire had no idea what miracle had landed this child in her path, or how he could possibly know so much about childbirth, but she would remember the moment his hand pressed hers with firm certainty, and he whispered, "You're safe now." I've done this before, as the moment her world began to shift forever. With astonishing precision that belied his ragged appearance, Luca helped Claire carefully to her feet, his hands firm yet gentle as he guided her into the narrow, shadowed alley nestled between two old brick buildings, an unlikely sanctuary amid the chaos of Fifth Avenue's relentless bustle, where the harsh glare of the late afternoon sun gave way to a cooler, more forgiving shade that promised at least some relief from the sweltering heat and prying eyes. The air was tinged with the scent of damp concrete and distant exhaust fumes, but here the noise of the city seemed muffled, the crowds thinned, and for a moment the urgency of her situation could be focused without distraction, a small pocket of calm in the eye of the storm. Luca crouched down next to a low crate, stacked with forgotten cardboard boxes, and rummaged quickly beneath it, producing an old satchel worn thin by years of use, but still functional, the leather cracked and the seams patched haphazardly with thread and hope, as he dumped its contents carefully onto the rough surface beside them. A few stained cloths folded with care, a dull but surprisingly clean pocket knife that gleamed faintly despite the grime, a roll of gauze still sealed in, plastic and a bottle of water already half empty, but enough for now. Claire, gasping and sweating through the waves of pain radiating from her abdomen, watched him with a mixture of awe and disbelief, struggling to steady her breath, her hands trembling as she leaned back against the cool brick wall for support, the cold biting through her thin dress and offering a stark contrast to the heat raging within her. "What's your name?" she managed to ask, her voice raw, almost broken as she fought another contraction that forced a strangled cry from her lips, tears mingling with the dirt on her cheeks. He looked up at her, eyes steady and unflinching despite the exhaustion, etched into every line of his face, and simply said, "Luca," as if that one word carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Before she could ask more, he began tearing a threadbare blanket into strips, the fabric unraveling in his hands as he worked quickly but methodically, his movements precise and practiced despite the raggedness of his clothing and the youthfulness of his face. his fingers expertly twisting and knotting the makeshift bands with an ease that betrayed experience. "I've helped before," he said quietly, almost to himself, his gaze distant as if recalling memories better left untouched. "In the camps, in the streets." The words hung in the stale air, loaded with a gravitas that sent a shiver down Claire's spine despite her pain. "My mother was a nurse before she—" His voice faltered, the sentence trailing off as if the rest was too painful or too dangerous to speak aloud, the silence stretching between them like a chasm carved by war and loss. As if on cue, her water broke with a sudden warm rush that soaked the fabric between her legs and sent a fresh surge of panic through her already overwhelmed mind, the primal fear of childbirth compounded by the cold reality of her situation. Alone in a city street, far from hospital walls with only a beggar boy to guide her. But Luca's voice cut through her rising terror like a lifeline, calm and unwavering. "You're doing great. Breathe. Listen to me." His words were a beacon, in the storm, anchoring her as another contraction gripped her body, twisting her in agony but also sharpening her focus. With every wave of pain, Luca coached her breath, instructing her to slow the frantic gasps and find a rhythm, to push when he told her and rest when he said so, his tone firm but soothing as he checked the baby's position with hands surprisingly confident and gentle, feeling for the head, the pulse, the shifting angles that told him how much longer until the moment of delivery. All around them, the city carried on oblivious. Car horns blaring, footsteps pounding, distant sirens wailing somewhere beyond the alley. But here, in this hidden alcove, time seemed to stretch and condense at once, hours passing in minutes. As Luca shielded Claire from the gawking crowd that had gathered just outside the alley's entrance, keeping prying eyes away with sharp gestures and a voice that brooked no argument. The bystanders' faces were a mixture of awe and disbelief, some whispering fervently, others filming, but none daring to intervene except to murmur prayers or offer small tokens like blankets or bottles of water. The ambulance still hadn't arrived. The sirens in the distance, a cruel reminder that official help was on its way, but slow to reach them. And so it was just Luca and Claire, two strangers bound by fate in the most intense and vulnerable moment of their lives. Luca's hands moved with clinical calmness as he guided Claire through each step, his fingers tracing paths she could feel but not see, whispering in a language she didn't recognize, a melodic cadence of Arabic phrases full of encouragement and instruction, before seamlessly switching back to perfect English, his accent carrying the faintest hint of a place far from this concrete jungle. "On the next push, the head's coming," he instructed softly, eyes locked on hers, voice steady as a metronome. Claire screamed with the pain and pressure, every muscle in her body screaming for release as she bore down with everything she had, tears streaming freely now, sweat mixing with grime on her face. But Luca's presence was a steady anchor, his hands supporting her, his voice urging her onward. And then suddenly, with a final surge of effort, relief washed over her like a tidal wave as the newborn's unmistakable wail shattered the silence of the alley, piercing through the cacophony of city sounds and holding the crowd captive in stunned silence for a heartbeat, before cheers erupted from onlookers who had watched the miracle unfold. Luca wrapped the tiny infant gently in the clean cloths from his satchel, his touch reverent despite the haste, and then, with practiced efficiency, used the pocket knife to cut the umbilical cord, tying it off securely with the strips of blanket he had prepared earlier, each movement fluid and sure, as though he had performed this ritual countless times before, too many times to count. Claire wept openly, the flood of emotions overwhelming her, the pain, the fear, the relief, the profound gratitude. And through her tears she asked, voice trembling, "How do you know all this?" Luca looked away briefly, the shadows of his past flickering behind his dark eyes before he answered quietly, "My family used to run a medical clinic before the war." The word war struck her like a blow, the implications unfolding in her mind like a dark tapestry of suffering and survival. "You're a refugee," she whispered, stunned by the boy's maturity, resilience, and the burden he carried on his slender shoulders. He nodded faintly, "From Aleppo." And in that moment Claire understood that this boy was more than just a beggar. He was a survivor, a healer forged in the crucible of conflict and loss, who had found her in the most desperate moment and become the miracle she needed. As the sounds of approaching sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of emergency responders who would finally take over care for mother and child, Claire's heart swelled with a mix of awe and sorrow for the boy who had saved her, knowing their lives were forever intertwined by this fragile thread of fate woven in an alley on Fifth Avenue. The arrival of the paramedics was both a relief and a strange moment of transition. As the flashing lights of the ambulance cast flickering blue and red shadows into the alleyway, Luca stepped back, wiping his hands on the tattered cloths, his face unreadable but exhausted beyond words, while Claire, still trembling from the shock and intensity of childbirth, watched with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief as the professionals moved swiftly to assess her and the newborn baby swaddled gently in Luca's care, their practiced voices calm, yet efficient, as they checked vital signs, spoke softly to reassure her, and prepared to transport mother and child to the hospital for thorough medical care. Yet even as the paramedics took over, there was a moment frozen in time where Claire's eyes locked once more with Luca's. That fierce, soulful gaze filled with a quiet strength and humility that contradicted everything society might have expected from a homeless boy. A silent acknowledgement passing between them that this moment was life-changing, not just for her, but for him as well. The crowd that had gathered at the alley's entrance now buzzed with hushed conversations, some praising the boy's bravery, others speculating about his story, and a few moved to offer him blankets and food, but Luca declined with a quiet shake of his head, his focus already shifting to something beyond the immediate scene. As Claire was lifted gently onto the stretcher and carried toward the ambulance doors, she reached out a weak hand and gripped Luca's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wait, who are you really? Why were you here?" And for the first time since they met, Luca hesitated, his dark eyes clouded with memories he clearly tried to suppress, before he knelt down and whispered, "I'm just a boy who knows what it means to lose everything, and to save a life." And then he vanished into the shadows of the city, leaving behind a story that would haunt Claire's thoughts for months to come. Transported to the hospital, Claire and her baby were met with the sterile, bright environment of modern medicine, nurses and doctors buzzing around them, but her mind kept drifting back to Luca's quiet strength, his words, and the inexplicable bond forged in that alleyway, prompting her to begin a quest to find him, to thank him, to understand the boy, who had appeared like an angel from the streets. Her search led her through local shelters, youth outreach centers, and community clinics, piecing together fragments of information about a boy known to help others in emergencies, despite his difficult circumstances, a boy who spoke several languages and had the uncanny ability to calm the most chaotic situations, rumors that only deepened the mystery surrounding Luca's past and purpose. Meanwhile, Luca navigated the city's underbelly with a quiet resilience, helping those who others overlooked, tending to wounds, offering hope, and avoiding the authorities who sought to place him in the foster system or shelters that never felt like home, all while carrying the secret of his family's history in war-torn Syria, a past marked by loss, courage, and an unwavering commitment to healing others, even at great personal cost. As Claire's baby grew healthy and strong, so did her determination to find Luca, culminating in a poignant reunion beneath the same city lights where their paths had first crossed, a moment filled with tears, laughter, and shared stories that revealed the depths of pain and hope, tragedy and survival, binding them forever, in a friendship that transcended circumstance and reminded them both of the extraordinary power of compassion, humanity, and the unexpected miracles that can emerge when least expected, especially in a city that often seems too busy to notice the quiet heroes living among its shadows. 2 weeks after that unforgettable day, Claire found herself standing before a crowded press podium in the heart of the city, her newborn daughter cradled gently in her arms, flanked on one side by her devoted husband and on the other by Luca, the boy who had saved her life in the most extraordinary and unexpected way. The room was charged with anticipation, reporters and cameras trained on the small family, as Claire's voice rang out clear and unwavering, telling a story that would forever change how the city saw the invisible and the overlooked, How one child, a beggar boy with tattered clothes and no permanent home, had stepped into the darkest moment of a stranger's life and turned it into a beacon of hope and humanity. She spoke passionately about the strength and courage Luca had shown, about the miracles that happen when compassion refuses to be bound by circumstance or prejudice, and about how, in a city of millions, so many had walked by without seeing. Yet Luca had seen her, had chosen to act when no one else would. With every word, the room grew more silent, then erupted in applause so thunderous it shook the walls, a testament to the profound impact of Luca's actions and the undeniable power of kindness in a world too often hardened by indifference. In the days that followed, Claire took the fight beyond the spotlight, going to the mayor's office, the city council chambers, and countless media outlets, refusing to let the world forget the boy who had given her and her daughter a chance at life and a future. Her relentless advocacy sparked a wave of support that led to Luca being granted emergency legal protection from deportation and homelessness, ensuring that he would no longer have to face the harsh streets alone. Medical school sponsorship offers poured in from universities moved by his story, recognizing not only his talent, but also the resilience that had kept him alive through unspeakable hardship. An anonymous donor stepped forward to provide him a place in a private foster home equipped with resources that promised stability and opportunities he had never dreamed of. Yet, amidst all the accolades and new beginnings, Luca made one humble but heartfelt request. He wished to remain close to Claire and her daughter, feeling a deep bond with them that transcended gratitude, and spoke of family forged in the fires of survival. "So you're the only person who looked at me like I wasn't broken," he confided quietly one evening, as they sat together beneath the same stars that had witnessed his quiet heroism, a sentiment that touched Claire's heart more deeply than words could express. Inspired by the boy who had given her hope when she felt hopeless, Claire named her daughter Hope, a living testament to the miracle Luca had brought into their lives, a symbol of the light that can shine even in the darkest alleys of the city. At the press event, Claire's closing words resonated with profound truth. In a city of millions, no one stopped, except a child who had lost everything, a boy with no shoes, no home, and yet more courage and compassion than most adults I've ever met. And as the crowd rose to their feet, Luca looked down shyly, adjusting the collar of his crisp new shirt, the transformation from ragged street boy to promising young man evident in every nervous but hopeful smile. Soon after, Luca enrolled in school, embracing the challenge of formal education with the same determination that had seen him through war and hardship. Yet every evening, without fail, he visited Claire and little Hope, reading to her in a melodic blend of English, Arabic, and French, teaching lullabies from his homeland, his voice soft and soothing. A guardian and a brother rolled into one. Years passed, and Luca blossomed into a gifted pediatric surgeon, his hands skilled not only in medicine, but also in healing the invisible wounds of trauma and displacement, carrying with him the lessons of empathy and resilience learned from a childhood marred by conflict and poverty. Despite the accolades and success, he never forgot the alley on Fifth Avenue, the place where fate had intertwined his path with Claire's in the most profound way, or the woman who had trusted him when the world had turned away, whose faith had been the cornerstone of his transformation. And Claire, often reflecting on the journey that had forever changed their lives, would say with a smile and tears in her eyes, "That day I gave birth to my daughter, but I also found a son," a testament to the extraordinary bonds that can emerge from the most unexpected places, proving that family is sometimes chosen, sometimes found, and always born of love and courage in the face of adversity.